My name is Gavin Morrow. I'm 44 years old, and I live in a small town in rural Colorado. I've been a custom furniture maker for almost 2 decades. If you'd asked me a year ago where I thought I'd be today, I would have told you I was living my dream, steady work, a beautiful home, and a partner who loved me. But that all changed one evening, just after sunset. I came home after a long day at the workshop, the smell of sawdust and varnish still clinging to my clothes, the sound of the radio still echoing in my head. The truck was parked in its usual spot, and the front door was unlocked. As I stepped inside, I called out Elena's name, but no response came. That wasn't unusual. Elena, ever the free spirit, had a tendency to retreat into one of her moods. She'd be off somewhere, meditating, or taking one of her long walks in the woods behind the house. But when I walked into the living room, something felt off. There, on the coffee table, was a note. Simple, elegant. This isn't abandonment. This is awakening. At first, I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. My mind raced through a dozen different explanations, but none of them made sense. Elena had never been the type to leave without a word, especially not like this. I picked up the note, hoping to find some sort of clue that would explain this madness. But there was nothing more, just those cryptic words staring back at me. I called her phone, and when it went straight to voicemail, I tried again and again. Each time, the same robotic message, her voice cold and distant, as if she'd already gone. A creeping panic settled in my chest. I was left in the empty house, the silence suffocating. By the time the shock wore off and I managed to start piecing things together, it had already been 2 days. 2 days since Elena vanished without a trace, leaving me with nothing but that damn note and a growing sense of dread. And then the papers arrived. A sheriff's deputy showed up at my door with a stack of legal documents, all stamped with the county seal. Elena, it seemed, wasn't just walking away. She was suing me for half of everything. The business, the house, back pay for all the emotional damages she claimed I owed her. Oh, and she also wanted the rights to the name of the workshop, Morrow's Woodworks, the one we had built together, the one she'd helped design the logo for, the one, as she now put it, she had energetically cleansed with her presence. I stood there, staring at the papers, feeling a sick twist in my gut. Elena had reinvented herself. She was no longer the woman I had fallen in love with. Now, she was something else entirely, a self-proclaimed life path guide, a spiritual healer. She had already made plans to move to Sri Lanka with a guy named Lucian, a so-called sacred architect who, judging by the photos she'd posted, seemed like a yoga enthusiast who'd spent too much time in the sun. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal of her sudden departure or the fact that she had left me to face this insanity alone. That's when I called Benji. Benji was a college buddy of mine who'd turned into a contract lawyer after law school. He wasn't exactly a high-powered attorney, but he was sharp, and more importantly, he was someone I trusted. I told him what had happened, and the more I spoke, the more I realized just how deep this was going to get. The legal papers weren't just about a divorce. They were about my life's work, my business, my livelihood. And Elena was going to take it all from me, claiming that her healing energy had contributed just as much to the success of Morrow's Woodworks as my craftsmanship. I had no idea how I was going to win this battle, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything. And so began the fight. A fight I wasn't sure I'd win, but one I had no choice but to take. I had to protect my business. I had to protect the life I had worked so hard to build. The courtroom was crowded when Elena finally made her first appearance. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the last few weeks hanging like a storm cloud over us. Benji, my lawyer, sat at the table next to me, calm as always. He'd been doing everything he could to prepare for this, but it was impossible to know what to expect. The legal battle we were about to fight wasn't just about property or money. It was about something far more insidious. Elena was coming at me with everything she had, and her tactics were unconventional. Elena's entrance was theatrical. As expected, she walked in, wearing flowing white robes, and with an almost ethereal glow about her, as if she had just come from a sacred retreat. The spiritual rebranding she'd been working on for months had taken full effect. Her eyes were wide with purpose, and she looked every bit the part of the life path guide she had now become. I could almost hear the faint hum of healing crystals as she settled into the witness chair. When the proceedings started, Elena wasn't alone. She had brought witnesses, people who supposedly knew her in ways I never had, people who claimed to understand her energy and spiritual potential. The first witness was a breath sculptor, a man who looked like he had just stepped out of a yoga retreat. His job was, apparently, to teach people how to breathe in ways that aligned their chakras, and he spoke in terms I could hardly follow. He claimed Elena had been instrumental in his spiritual growth, helping him find balance, and, most shockingly, cleansing my workshop, which he suggested had contributed directly to the revenue Morrow's Woodworks had earned over the years. I could feel my jaw tighten. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a full-blown smear campaign. A breath sculptor? A numerologist? Benji was cool, though. He'd been preparing for the bizarre, knowing full well Elena would try to paint herself as a goddess while making me out to be the devil. He'd already gathered everything, all the business books and client testimonials that proved my work, not Elena's mystical contributions, had been the driving force behind the company's success. When Benji stood up to present, he didn't flinch at the absurdity of it all. With his usual steady, composed voice, he pointed out the numbers, the real numbers, client satisfaction, revenue growth, and the long hours I'd spend in the shop, painstakingly crafting every piece of furniture. Then came the twist. Benji had dug deeper into Elena's financials. He'd noticed some discrepancies, small, insignificant at first, but upon closer inspection, they became a serious issue. A few months ago, he had uncovered a series of encrypted transactions under Elena's name, all linked to obscure wellness NFTs and Ascension tokens. He'd been able to track them, and what we found shocked me to my core. Elena had secretly invested over $1 million in these digital assets, all under pseudonyms. She had been hiding it from the court, from me, and perhaps most damning of all, from her supposed healing community. In court, Benji presented the evidence, a digital ledger showing the purchases, the wallets, and the growth of her crypto fortune. As Benji read through the transaction history, Elena's face turned pale, and for a moment, I could see the cracks in her perfect spiritual facade. "Elena," Benji said, turning to her, "you've presented yourself as a victim of emotional abuse, and yet you've hidden over $1 million in cryptocurrency investments that no one knew about. Does this sound like the actions of someone who is living a life of healing and authenticity?" The silence in the room was deafening. Elena shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hands gripping the armrests as if she was trying to hold on to some shred of control. But the damage had already been done. The audience, the judge, the jury, had heard everything they needed to know. Elena wasn't just trying to claim what was mine. She had been building her own financial empire behind the scenes, all while painting me as the villain. I'd seen Elena lie to my face before, but this was a whole new level. The judge seemed just as stunned as I was. He glanced at Elena and then back at Benji. "This will need further investigation," the judge said, his voice cold. "I'm ordering a full audit of these transactions. If what's being claimed is true, this case will take a very different turn." The day ended in chaos. Elena's once immaculate reputation as a spiritual guide had started to unravel, one digital wallet at a time. As I walked out of the courtroom with Benji by my side, I couldn't help but feel a sense of bitter triumph. Elena had tried to destroy me, but now her own greed was on full display. She wasn't just a victim. She was a manipulator, a con artist disguised in flowing robes. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure. This fight was far from over, and I wasn't about to let her win. It wasn't enough for Elena to simply disappear, or to take half of everything we'd built together. No, she had to take my identity too. It started with a letter from her attorney, another round of legal papers. As if the first batch wasn't enough of a gut punch, this one was more personal, much more personal. Elena had filed a trademark claim on my full name, Gavin Morrow, and was trying to rebrand me, or at least the version of me she had sculpted, as her spiritual muse. She called it sacred craftsmanship. Her lawyer claimed she had cultivated my talent and was now entitled to the rights to my name, as it represented the spiritual journey she had led me on. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, looking at the paper in disbelief. Was this really happening? Was Elena really trying to turn me into some kind of spiritual brand? It didn't stop there. Along with the trademark claim, Elena's team had launched a website, one that took old photos of us, wedding pictures, snapshots of us laughing at the workshop, and repurposed them with a tagline, "The man who found divine grain." The caption, under a picture of me holding a carved wooden chair, read, "Gavin Morrow, the sacred craftsman of a new era." I wanted to throw up. This wasn't just about the business anymore. She was trying to erase me, myself, and mold me into whatever image she had of me in her head. She wasn't just taking my work. She was trying to take my soul. I didn't say anything at first. I just handed the papers to Benji. He took them in stride, glancing at them, then raising an eyebrow. "She's doing what?" Benji asked, genuinely surprised. "She's trying to make me her brand," I said, shaking my head. "She's taken everything, my business, our life, our history, and turned it into something that belongs to her. Now she's trying to own my name. What's next, Benji? Am I going to be a trademarked spiritual object too?" Benji sat back, pulling out his laptop. "This is absurd. You're not just fighting for your business anymore. She's coming after your entire identity." He clicked away, opening some documents on the screen. "We'll file a cease and desist. Let's see how she likes that." The next morning, Benji filed the cease and desist on my behalf. It wasn't a long wait for the backlash to come. Elena's lawyers responded almost immediately, claiming that her work was an artistic expression and that her rebranding of me was protected under freedom of speech. It didn't matter that she was using my personal likeness to build her spiritual empire. She was claiming it as her right and as her artistic vision. We were in court 2 weeks later. As I sat there, watching Elena's lawyer argue for her right to my name, I couldn't help but think of everything I had built with my hands, The furniture, the legacy, the passion I'd put into my work over the years. And now Elena wanted to own it. She wanted to own me. When my turn came, I stood, feeling the eyes of the court on me. The judge, an older man who seemed unamused by the entire ordeal, sat with his hand on his chin, listening intently. Benji stood by my side, ready with the counterarguments. We presented Elena's website as evidence, showing the blatant use of my image and name. But Elena's lawyer was relentless. He argued that it was a new form of spiritual expression, that my craft had transformed under her guidance, and that my identity had merged with her spiritual work. It wasn't just business anymore, it was art. The judge, his face growing increasingly irritated, finally called a recess. He had clearly had enough of Elena's nonsensical claims. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge didn't mince words. He was visibly furious. "This is a legal matter, not a spiritual one," he said sharply. "I will not allow anyone to trademark another person's name based on what seems like a personal vendetta or artistic vanity." Benji grinned, his eyes lighting up as he leaned in. "Judge, I think we've got this." But just as we were starting to feel like the tide was turning in our favor, something strange happened. Elena, who had been quiet for most of the day, suddenly clutched her chest, her face contorting in pain. "Root chakra compression," she gasped, collapsing forward onto the table. "It's happening again. My energy, it's blocking the flow." The room froze. The judge stared at her, clearly confused, and one of her lawyers scrambled to help her. Elena was slowly assisted out of the courtroom, her face pale, her breathing shallow. "Get the EMTs in here," the judge said, his tone sharp. "We're not wasting any more time on theatrics." The EMTs arrived a few minutes later, checking Elena's vitals. They found nothing physically wrong with her. No heart attack, no signs of distress. Just a woman who had, apparently, been so overwhelmed by the courtroom drama that she had resorted to an over-the-top spiritual stunt. The judge was not impressed. When Elena was helped back into the courtroom, looking pale and disheveled, the judge wasted no time. "Ms. Rivera, if you intend to waste more of this court's time with theatrics, I will have you escorted out," he said, his voice cold. And that was that. The case was adjourned, but not before the judge issued a temporary ruling in my favor, stating that Elena had no right to claim my name, my likeness, or any of my intellectual property. I left the courthouse that day feeling a mixture of relief and rage. Elena wasn't just trying to steal from me, she was trying to steal my very identity. As for her chakra collapse, it seemed like one more part of her increasingly bizarre campaign to manipulate the system. And I couldn't help but think, the further she pushed, the more ridiculous she became. But I also knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her turn me into something I wasn't. Not this time. Elena had crossed a line, and the battle was far from over. But in that moment, I could feel a sense of hope, like maybe, just maybe, I was finally starting to win this fight. The courtroom felt like a circus that day, and I wasn't sure whether Elena was the ringleader or just a spectator. Her antics had grown bolder, more absurd with each passing week. If I thought things couldn't get worse after the trademark fiasco, Elena proved me wrong. This time, she brought backup. Lucien. He strolled into the courtroom with the kind of nonchalant swagger that made my blood boil. Shirtless, of course, with a draped linen cloth that looked more like a beach towel than a business suit. The guy had all the spiritual charisma of a trust fund hippie, elusive, smug, and deeply committed to selling the idea that he was some kind of guru. His unkempt hair hung over his face as he took the stand, shifting nervously under the judge's gaze. Lucien's testimony was a masterpiece of mysticism. He claimed that, since Elena's awakening, he'd been manifesting client leads remotely from Guatemala, where he supposedly resided in an intentional community, spiritually cultivating prosperity from a distance. Manifesting client leads? I whispered to Benji, incredulous. Benji just shrugged. "A scam in linen pants," he muttered, readying himself for another round of counterarguments. Lucien went on, speaking in a steady drone. "My energy, aligned with Elena's, has attracted clients who were destined to work with us. I do this remotely, via spiritual channels. I have never physically been present at Gavin's shop, but my influence is undeniable." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly struggling to keep a straight face. "Mr. Kendrick, are you suggesting that your energetic presence has contributed to Mr. Morrow's business?" Lucien nodded solemnly, eyes flicking over to Elena, who was watching him with an expression of pure adoration, as though he were speaking the gospel. Benji wasn't buying it. "Your Honor, I would like to point out that Mr. Kendrick's testimony is based purely on metaphysical claims. We have no concrete evidence of any actual business transactions or spiritual manifestations. In fact," Benji continued, flipping through some papers in his binder, "we have clear financial records showing that all of Mr. Morrow's client leads were generated through traditional methods, marketing, word of mouth, and years of hard work." I watched as Benji calmly presented the business's books, complete with testimonials from satisfied clients who'd found me through actual craftsmanship and word of mouth, not some mystical energy. But as if on cue, the absurdity of the situation took another turn. Elena, sitting next to Lucian, gave a subtle nod, signaling her next move. She had always been good at making herself the center of attention, and now she was doubling down on her story. She presented documents that seemed equally dubious, receipts and invoices for things like spiritual retreats and energy cleansing workshops that, according to her, had been necessary business expenses. She argued that these retreats, where she traveled to far-off locations with Lucian, were part of the spiritual development she had undertaken for the good of her business. In fact, she claimed, these spiritual retreats had directly contributed to her success because they purified her energy and aligned her with universal abundance. But Benji was quick to pull the rug out from under her. With a look of satisfaction, he presented the forensic audit he had commissioned, which revealed tens of thousands of dollars spent on things that were far from spiritual development. Your Honor, Benji began, pulling up a detailed report. We've tracked multiple financial transfers to workshops and retreats that, while Elena may consider personal growth, have little to do with the workshop's actual business. Benji clicked a button on his laptop, and a series of receipts flashed on the screen. For example, he continued, a $10,000 payment to a retreat in Bali for chakra alignment, a $15,000 purchase of exotic animal totems for energy rituals, and a $5,000 seminar titled Manifesting Abundance Through Crystals. None of this has anything to do with Morrow's woodworks, and yet she claims it as business expenses. The courtroom went silent. I could feel Elena's grip on her carefully cultivated persona begin to loosen. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but Lucian remained unfazed. He wasn't exactly the most self-aware individual, and he seemed to believe that his energetic contributions were just as valid as hard-earned money. This is absurd, Elena's lawyer interjected. These are essential personal developments. The journey Elena has taken to become her true self is an integral part of her work, and it enriches her business. Benji didn't miss a beat. Your Honor, this isn't about self-expression. It's about money laundering under the guise of spiritual enlightenment. These are not legitimate business expenses. The judge, who had been quietly taking notes, finally spoke up, his voice grave. I'm ordering a full psychiatric evaluation of Ms. Rivera and Mr. Kendrick, as this behavior appears to go beyond the scope of normal business practice. That was it. It was the final blow to their mystic charade. We'd stripped away their layers of lies, and now it was clear to everyone in the room. Elena and Lucian weren't trying to run a legitimate business. They were con artists, capitalizing on spirituality to mask their greed. I couldn't help but feel a small sense of vindication. This had gone from a bitter legal battle to something absurd, but it wasn't over yet. Elena and Lucian would push back, and the chaos would only continue. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I felt a strange sense of relief. This war wasn't over, but at least we'd finally managed to expose the truth. The only question was, how far would Elena go to keep her twisted version of the story alive? And more importantly, how far was I willing to go to stop her? Things had gotten to the point where I didn't even recognize the world I was fighting in anymore. The legal battle had been ugly from the start, but Elena had found a new way to weaponize the system. I wasn't just fighting for my business anymore. I was fighting to keep my reputation intact, to keep my life from being completely obliterated by a woman I thought I knew. One morning, as I was at the workshop, trying to focus on some new designs for a custom piece, my phone rang. It was Benji. The tone in his voice made my stomach drop. You need to come to the office. It's urgent. I drove over, the whole way bracing myself for whatever ridiculous move Elena had made next. When I arrived, Benji didn't waste time. Gavin, this is insane, he said, holding up a stack of papers. Elena has somehow figured out how to escalate this into a personal attack. I looked at him, my mind racing. What now? Child services, Benji said, running a hand through his hair. They've been called on you. I blinked. What? Someone reported that you're harboring an unregistered orphan and that you're teaching toxic fatherhood rituals. Benji's face twisted in disbelief. This is absolute madness. My mind raced. I had no idea who would have made this kind of accusation, but I didn't have to think too hard to guess who was behind it. Elena had always been good at pushing things to extremes, and now she was trying to drag me through the mud. As it turned out, the report had come through a completely anonymous tip. Child services had to investigate, of course, but after the interview and some clear questions about my actual parenting, they quickly found there was no truth to the claim. I wasn't harboring any unregistered children. I wasn't teaching toxic fatherhood rituals. What was happening here wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a smear campaign designed to hit me where it hurt most, my credibility. Benji wasn't about to let this slide. We need to hit back now, he said. I'm filing for sanctions. We'll expose this for what it is. This has gone too far. It felt surreal. I had spent years building my reputation as a solid, reliable craftsman. Now, I was being accused of abuse, of something so ridiculous that I couldn't even process it without feeling sick. But Elena was nothing if not persistent. The next day, we were back in court, facing off again. This time, the judge was growing visibly weary of Elena's tactics. The courtroom was tense, the air heavy with exhaustion from months of bizarre claims and counterclaims. Elena, sitting next to her attorney, had reverted back into her healer persona. She stood and spoke with such conviction that it made my skin crawl. "I'm not just here to fight for my business," she said, her voice quivering with purpose. "I am a truth vessel. I'm here to uncover the lies, the hidden truths about Gavin and the toxic environment he's been creating. I won't stand by while he uses his manipulation to deceive everyone around him. This is about the greater good. This is about healing." She was speaking like she had just stepped off a stage at a spiritual seminar, the audience nodding in rapt attention to her every word. But the judge, his patience clearly running out, snapped back. "Ms. Rivera, if you intend to continue these delusional claims without evidence, I will have no choice but to issue sanctions. This is not a venue for spiritual counseling or personal vendettas." I thought I saw a flicker of concern cross Elena's face, but she quickly regained her composure, putting on a mask of righteous indignation. Benji, always calm, stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, the claims Ms. Rivera is making about Mr. Morrow's parenting, about his ability to raise children, are entirely baseless. We have documentation from Child Services clearing him of any wrongdoing. This is nothing more than a final attempt to disrupt and undermine Mr. Morrow's life and career." The judge looked at Elena, his expression hardening. "I will not tolerate these attacks. All claims against Mr. Morrow will be dismissed, and I am ordering your legal team to pay the costs for these frivolous motions. Furthermore, Ms. Rivera's image rights are hereby revoked." I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding my breath until I let it out, a slow exhale of relief. It was over, or so I thought. But Elena wasn't done yet. Just as the courtroom was beginning to empty, I saw her stagger to her feet, clutching her chest dramatically. "Root chakra compression," she gasped, falling to her knees as if the weight of the world had suddenly crushed her. The EMTs were called in, and after a few moments, they confirmed what I had suspected all along. There was nothing physically wrong with her. No heart attack, no medical emergency. Just another play for attention, another part of her theatrical performance. I couldn't help myself. I smiled, though I tried to hide it behind my hand. Benji, too, seemed to find the absurdity of the moment a little too much to contain. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered under his breath as we walked out of the courtroom. I wanted to believe this was the end, that Elena's latest stunt would be the last straw, and that the court and the world would see her for what she truly was: a manipulator, a liar, and someone who would go to any lengths to destroy me. But deep down, I knew Elena wasn't someone who gave up easily. It felt like a temporary win, but I had a sense that things weren't over yet. And as much as I hated the idea of it, I knew I had to keep fighting. If this was her last strike, she was going down with a fight, but I would be ready. And so, the battle continued. I hadn't planned for any of this. In fact, I was still trying to wrap my head around how everything had gone so sideways. But then, one day, Benji called me with news that would change everything. "You've been invited to a podcast," he said, the words hanging in the air like an unexpected gift. "A podcast?" I asked, confused. "What kind of podcast?" "About bizarre divorces," Benji explained, trying not to laugh. "Your story, Gavin, it's gone viral." My gut twisted. I hadn't intended for any of this to become public. But, apparently, Elena's spiritual circus had piqued the interest of more than just the legal world. I agreed, reluctantly, to do the interview, figuring that anything was better than sitting around letting Elena continue her smear campaign. The podcast host was a guy named Darren, with a voice like he'd been doing this for years. He immediately asked me how I felt about being blindsided by Elena and how it felt to have my entire life turned into some bizarre public spectacle. At first, I was hesitant to dive into the details, but Darren's questions were insightful, and after a few minutes of talking, I realized I wasn't just telling my side of the story. I was telling the story of so many other people who had been used, manipulated, and tossed aside by someone they trusted. That night, the episode went live. The numbers exploded. Memes started popping up on social media, with captions like "sacred sawdust" and "vibrational equity" attached to clips from the interview. People who had no idea who I was before began sharing their own stories of similar experiences with manipulative relationships. One clip, in particular, went viral. Me talking about how I'd built my business with my hands, how Elena had walked away with so much without so much as a word of gratitude. The next morning, I woke up to an email from a literary agent. "I'm interested in your story," she wrote. "Let's talk about a book deal." It felt like a whirlwind. Within a few weeks, I'd signed a deal with the agent, and just like that, I was thrust into the world of publishing. I titled my book, "She Sanded My Soul to Sell It." The title felt fitting. It wasn't just a reflection of my relationship with Elena, but of how I'd been ground down by her manipulation and lies, only to emerge on the other side stronger, clearer, and with a voice of my own. But as my public profile grew, so did Elena's reinvention. She had, of course, already begun marketing herself under the name Sierra Solace, a new persona designed to make her seem even more enlightened than before. She launched a new course titled from grief to grain, monetizing your breakup. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was now teaching people how to turn their own pain into profit, all while profiting off of the pain she'd caused me. Her marketing was slick, her photos curated to look like she'd just stepped out of a wellness magazine, surrounded by lush greenery and scented candles. And then there was Humble Grain, my business, which was suddenly growing at an astronomical rate. The new branding, the new focus on healing and craftsmanship, the book, it all came together in a way I hadn't anticipated. I'd never been one to market myself, but now, thanks to the podcast and the book, Humble Grain became something more than just a woodworking shop. It became a symbol for men, for people who'd been blindsided by spiritual charlatans. I felt conflicted. On the one hand, I was grateful for the unexpected success. On the other, I couldn't stop thinking about Elena and the damage she'd caused. But the truth was, my life had been reshaped by her in ways I never expected. This success, this new identity, it was mine. I had earned it, not through her manipulation, but through my own resilience. The media attention didn't stop there. I began getting invitations for interviews, articles, even talk shows. And it wasn't just my business that was getting recognition. It was the message I was spreading about recognizing emotional manipulation, about trusting your instincts, about reclaiming your life after someone has tried to break it down. But even as I was enjoying a sort of twisted redemption, Elena was still out there, doing her thing. She wasn't just teaching about healing and grief, she was monetizing it. She reappeared on social media, preaching about the power of spiritual transformation and selling courses on how to embrace the divine feminine and unlock the secrets of your soul's purpose. Her followers seemed none the wiser. I didn't really know what to do with this newfound fame. Part of me felt like I should just keep pushing forward, keep making furniture, keep my head down, and enjoy the quiet of my work. But every time I sat at my desk, every time I put my hands to a new piece of wood, I couldn't help but wonder how much of what I was building now was built on the wreckage she'd left behind. In a strange twist of fate, I became a folk hero for men who had been deceived by women like Elena. In every letter and comment, I saw the same thing. Men who had been emotionally gaslighted, who had felt small, unheard, and invisible. They saw something of themselves in my story. And for the first time, I realized that I wasn't alone in this. I had become a symbol of something I hadn't set out to be, a man who had found his voice after it had been silenced by someone he loved. I was no longer the fool in the story. I was the one who had rebuilt. And somehow, despite everything, that felt like the most unexpected victory of all. The sun had barely risen when I received the package. It wasn't large, just a small envelope, but the weight of it felt like a heavy stone in my chest. Inside, there was a USB drive with a note attached. The Sacred Truth of Gavin Morrow. I stared at it for a moment, an uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I didn't know what was worse, getting something like this from Elena, or the sick feeling that I was being drawn into yet another one of her spirals. The thought that she still had the power to unsettle me, even after everything that had happened, was both frustrating and humiliating. I connected the USB to my laptop and opened the file. What I saw left me frozen. It was a video of Elena, dressed in her usual spiritual garb, sitting in front of what looked like a hand-carved altar. She spoke passionately, her words tumbling out in a blur of spiritual jargon and self-righteous anger. "I've been the one to carry the weight of the truth," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was always the one who carried the energy, the vibrations of everything, even Gavin's success. The world doesn't understand, but I'm the one who cleansed the space, who brought the light to the dark wood of that workshop." Gavin just followed along. She continued, her eyes glazed with what I now saw as nothing more than manipulation. "And it wasn't just me. Lucian and I, we've co-created this whole empire. The wealth, the NFTs, the Ascension tokens, it's all part of the process. I've been laying the groundwork for our real future." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. NFTs? I had no idea she had gotten into that world. But there it was. An admission that Lucian had been involved with her financially long before I ever knew about it. Co-created this whole empire. I sat back, my mind racing. She had always been good at hiding things. But this was different. The video felt like a confession, a careless one, at that. Elena wasn't just playing at spiritual healing. She had been scheming, building a hidden financial network on the back of our failed relationship, while claiming the profits were a result of energetic work and spiritual alignment. I knew I had to act quickly. I called Benji and forwarded him the video. "Jesus," he said after watching it. "She's just admitted to everything. The NFTs, the partnership with Lucian. This is the smoking gun." Benji was right. This was the break we needed. We got to work immediately, pulling the details of the NFT transactions and crypto wallets Elena had mentioned in her rant. Benji contacted a crypto forensics expert to trace the wallets and confirm whether there was more hidden. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Elena and Lucian had been hiding millions of dollars worth of assets under different names, under different pseudonyms. Within a week, We had confirmation that Elena had funneled significant amounts of money into crypto, all through anonymous wallets she'd co-owned with Lucien. The total amounted to over $2 million, far more than the $1 million we'd originally suspected. We filed an emergency motion in court, presenting the video and the newly discovered financial evidence. This time, there was no mistaking it. Elena had been lying, manipulating not just me, but everyone around her. The court, seeing the weight of the evidence, froze her remaining assets. As soon as the order was made, something strange happened. Lucien, the so-called sacred architect, vanished. No more emails, no more phone calls, no messages, just gone. The irony of it all didn't escape me. After everything Elena had put me through, this was her downfall, her own unguarded confession, the exposure of her hidden life. For once, she was the one left exposed. A few days later, Benji and I sat in his office, the atmosphere still heavy with the weight of what had transpired. He handed me a printout of a news article that had popped up online, a headline that made me feel like I was reading about someone else's life. The Grift Whisperer, Sierra's Sacred Empire. The article was part of a documentary that had just aired, one that exposed Elena as a cautionary tale. The footage included clips from the podcast I'd done, the memes, the quotes that had gone viral, sacred sawdust, and vibrational equity. All of it was now the punchline of a much bigger joke. People were sharing their own stories of being manipulated by spiritual entrepreneurs, and Elena had become the face of it all. There was a certain satisfaction in seeing her exposed like this, seeing her entire facade crumble, her name dragged through the mud. But that satisfaction was bittersweet. It didn't erase the years I'd spent believing in her, trusting her, loving her. The hurt didn't go away just because she had been caught. Benji was scrolling through his phone when he looked up at me. She's gone. For now. But you know as well as I do, she's not done. She'll reinvent herself again. And when she does, you'll have to be ready. I nodded. But the truth was, I was tired. I was tired of the fight, tired of the manipulation. It had taken everything I had just to survive it. And now that it seemed like the battle was finally winding down, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted to myself before. I wasn't just done with Elena. I was done with the fight. The court had made its decision. Elena's assets were frozen. Lucien had disappeared. The documentary had aired. And yet, as the world finally began to turn its attention away from her and onto the next scandal, I found myself at peace. For the first time in years, the weight of her lies had been lifted. I wasn't going to chase her anymore. I wasn't going to fight for something that wasn't real. And I was finally free. Elena had played her hand, and it had cost her everything. As for me, I was ready to let it all go. But I knew, deep down, I had to be prepared. Elena would always be part of my past. And whatever she did next, I couldn't let her drag me back into her chaos. I was done fighting. And for the first time, that felt like the greatest victory of all. Just when I thought the madness was over, the universe decided to throw one more curveball my way. I should have known it wasn't over. Nothing about Elena's journey was ever final. But this time, it wasn't her that came knocking on my door. It was her partner in crime, the ever-dramatic Lucien. Only now, Lucien wasn't Lucien anymore. He'd reinvented himself with a new name, Sol Kendrick. I didn't recognize it at first. I mean, I never really followed his antics in the spiritual world, but Benji, ever the diligent investigator, had tracked him down when the lawsuit arrived in my inbox. Sol was suing me for defamation. I couldn't help but laugh. Defamation? Over what? My book? The Netflix adaptation that was currently in development? He claimed that his energetic backstory had been misrepresented and the dramatization of his life was causing him emotional trauma. It sounded like a joke, but then I saw the affidavit. He was serious. Energetic backlash and solar distress were the official terms he used to describe his pain, as if this wasn't some farcical Hollywood drama. But Sol wasn't just some washed-up spiritual guru. No, he was now claiming that I had publicly humiliated him with my portrayal, that his sacred identity had been misrepresented. And now, like any good con artist, he was trying to make me pay for it. Benji didn't miss a beat. We're going to need to dig deeper, he said, already typing away. Let's see what else this guy's been up to. Sol Kendrick, a name that sounded more like a character out of a low-budget Netflix series, had a past that was just as sketchy as his new persona. Benji uncovered an old website, Sacred Touch Rising, which Sol had used to gather followers and extract donations for what he called womb code unlocking. Yeah, you read that right. Women were donating thousands of dollars for the privilege of participating in these spiritual ceremonies designed to unlock their true potential by connecting with their wombs. Sol and Elena had made a killing, and I was about to find out how deep this scam really went. Benji found a former client of Sol's, a woman named Marissa, who had attended one of his workshops years ago. She was angry, not just because of the money she'd lost, but because she'd felt manipulated, just like I had. This guy, Marissa said, in a voicemail to Benji, he was always talking about the divine feminine energy and how we could tap into it, but what he was really doing was bleeding us dry. I had no idea he was planning to skip town with Elena's money. Sol had planned it all along. He was part of the scheme, a carefully orchestrated con to drain Elena's finances, leaving her with enough to stay relevant in the wellness industry while he took off with a cut. And when I found out, I couldn't believe it. He'd played me the same way he'd played everyone else. We were ready. Benji wasn't just going to let Sol's lawsuit slide. We gathered evidence of his fraudulent activities, everything from financial records to testimony. And as I sat there in Benji's office, reading through the documents, I knew it was only a matter of time before Sol would be exposed for the con man he truly was. When the court date finally came, Sol didn't look quite so sure of himself anymore. There was no confidence in his swagger, no more shirtless speeches about manifesting abundance. He looked tired, beaten, and desperate. And when Benji presented the forensic evidence showing how Sol had been involved in draining Elena's wealth and how he was planning to vanish with it, Sol faltered. The judge didn't waste any time. "Mr. Kendrick," the judge said, his voice cold and unimpressed, "you are not the victim here. You are part of the scam. This case is dismissed, and the court sanctions you for wasting the court's time." Sol's face turned pale, his lips trembling as the reality of his situation set in. He didn't even try to fight it. Within hours of the ruling, Sol Kendrick vanished. Again, no more lawsuits, no more fake names. He had disappeared into thin air, leaving Elena to deal with the wreckage. And just like that, the final thread in this chaotic saga was cut. Elena and her partner, her sacred architect, had both crumbled under the weight of their lies. What they thought would be their escape had turned into their downfall. It was over, almost. But it wasn't just the legal victories that gave me peace. It was knowing that Sol had played his last card. He wasn't coming back, and neither was Elena. Their whole empire of mysticism and manipulation had been exposed, turned into the joke it always should have been. For once, I didn't feel the need to seek revenge. They had already lost, and in the end, their greatest weapon, fame, had become their downfall. The next morning, I woke up early, sitting in my shop, working on a new project. The smell of fresh wood filled the air. As I carved and shaped, my thoughts drifted. I'd been fighting for so long. For justice, for truth, for my business. But now, I didn't have to fight anymore. I was done. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. It was one of those cold, overcast days in Colorado when I finally saw her again. The sky, as gray as my thoughts, hung heavily above the workshop. The stillness of the air made everything feel too quiet, too still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She was standing there at the edge of the driveway when I saw her. Elena, her face thinner than I remembered, eyes hollow in a way I hadn't seen before. Gone were the flowing robes and the spiritual aura she used to wear like armor. Gone was the smile she'd flashed in public, that same one she used to justify everything she did. Now she looked like she hadn't slept in days, maybe weeks. I had expected the anger, the vindication, but this time, there was only exhaustion. I stopped working, my hands gripping the smooth grain of the wood in front of me as I took in the sight of her. I didn't say anything at first. There was nothing to say. It was as if the years of chaos, of manipulation, and of lies had finally come to a point where the truth had nowhere to hide. She took a hesitant step toward me, then another, her face crumpling in what seemed like the start of an apology, but she stopped herself before the words could form. I don't expect you to forgive me, Gavin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to know what I did." The words hung in the air like a confession that had been coming for far too long. For a moment, I was speechless. What had I expected? Anger? More manipulation? More excuses? Instead, she just stood there, looking broken. It was a rare moment of vulnerability I had never seen in her before. I've been lying to you," Elena continued, her hands shaking slightly as she ran them through her hair. "To you, to myself, to everyone. I told myself that it was all for the greater good, that I was helping people, but it was never about healing. It was about me. It was about fame." Her words hit me harder than I'd imagined they would. Fame. That was it, wasn't it? She had always wanted to be more than who she was. She had wanted to be a brand, a symbol, not just a woman. She had wanted to change the world, not by actually doing something good, but by making herself the center of it all. "I thought I could be someone different," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought if I could just become something more, something spiritual, something pure, then I could leave all the pain behind. I could be what you needed, what everyone needed." She paused, her gaze turning distant, as if the reality of what she was saying finally began to settle in. "Lucien, he was always part of it. I thought he was my salvation. He told me that I could be the goddess I was meant to be, but I couldn't do it with you. Not really. Not the way I wanted. So I kept pushing you further out, so I could step into the spotlight." A hollow laugh escaped her, a sound I'd never thought I'd hear coming from her. It was sad, regretful. "I used you, Gavin," she said, finally making eye contact. "I used you to get everything I thought I needed, and I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd let me keep playing the part of the healer, the woman who knew everything. But I didn't know anything. I was just pretending." I stood there, my heart a mix of bitterness and, what? Pity? For her? For the woman who had shredded my world? It didn't feel like forgiveness. It didn't feel like closure either. I wanted to replace you, she added, her voice trembling. It wasn't just about leaving you. It was about erasing you, the real you. I needed to be someone else, someone more powerful. And you were in the way. I convinced myself that if I could make you into something sacred enough, I could own you, that I could make this story mine. But it's all been a lie, a huge lie. Her confession hung in the air, like a weight settling on my chest. I had always known there was something off about her, about the way she saw the world, about the way she treated people. But to hear it all laid bare like this, to hear that I had been nothing but a pawn in her game of spiritual conquest, it stung more than I cared to admit. I'm leaving, Gavin, she said, breaking the silence. For good. I'm going to live with a cousin in Oregon. I don't want to keep pretending. I just need to fade away. I'll work at a co-op. I'll live quietly. I don't need the spotlight anymore. I didn't respond immediately. How could I? Everything I had known, everything I had trusted, had been so distorted by her ambitions. I'm not forgiving you, I finally said, my voice steady, even though everything inside me wanted to scream. But I'm glad you finally see it, for what it was, for what you did. She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know the truth before I go. I'm sorry for everything, Gavin. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I watched her turn and walk away, her silhouette disappearing into the distance. I didn't chase after her. I didn't call out. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace settle in me. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't understanding, but it was closure, the kind that I never thought I'd get. As I stood there, alone in the quiet of my shop, I realized something. The woman I had loved, the woman I had tried to build a life with, wasn't the woman who had left. She had been gone long before she'd ever physically walked out the door. And for the first time, I knew that I didn't need her to find peace. I could find it on my own. Maybe that was the greatest victory of all. Months had passed since I last saw Elena. The dust from the legal battles had finally settled, and for the first time in years, my life felt still, quiet. I had rebuilt, both literally and figuratively. My business was thriving under its new name, Humble Grain, and the book I'd written, She Sanded My Soul to Sell It, had somehow become a bestseller. I never intended to be a folk hero for men blindsided by spiritual manipulation, but that's exactly what I became. I'd been invited to podcasts, talk shows, and even a documentary special that aired under the title The Grift Whisperer, Sierra's Sacred Empire. It was a deeply ironic piece, turning Elena's entire career into a cautionary tale for anyone who thought they could profit from other people's lives by wearing the mask of a spiritual guide. The flood of letters and messages from men who had experienced similar manipulation was overwhelming. They shared their stories of quiet abuse, of being gaslit in ways that nobody ever talks about, the parts of themselves they'd lost in relationships like mine with Elena. In a way, my story had become their story. I wasn't alone anymore. And neither were they. But there was still a lingering uncertainty in the back of my mind, a sense that Elena would find a way to slip back into the chaos she created, maybe in a new form, maybe with a new persona. One afternoon, as I sat at my workshop, I received an email that sent a chill through me. It was from a woman named Vanessa, a name I didn't recognize. She said she had known Elena from the past. She wrote, "You might want to know she's back. Elena has created a retreat center called the Phoenix Shelter under the name Solace. She's teaching women to reclaim truth from narcissistic captors. She's using all the buzzwords. Gavin, she's coming for this again." I stared at the screen, processing the words. Elena, under yet another guise, was back. Solace. A new name, a new beginning, but the same manipulative game. I didn't know what to do. The woman's words echoed in my mind. Reclaim truth from narcissistic captors. It was almost like Elena was profiting from being a victim herself now. She'd turned the tables again, this time to sell the idea of empowerment, of helping women like her supposedly find healing from relationships like ours. It was sickening, but it wasn't a surprise. I sat for a long time, thinking about how I'd handled everything up until this point, how I'd fought, how I'd pushed forward, trying to protect my name, my work, my sanity. But now, I realized something important. I didn't need to fight anymore. Instead, I pulled out a piece of paper and wrote her a letter. It wasn't long, and it wasn't full of anger. It wasn't full of regret either. It was just, final. Elena, I know what you're doing. You've reinvented yourself again, and I know you'll keep doing it, no matter how many times you fail. I'm not going to keep fighting you. I've let go, and I suggest you do the same. Let it go. I signed the letter, then hesitated for a moment before mailing it. As I dropped the envelope into the mailbox, something inside me shifted. A weight lifted. It wasn't about closure anymore. It was about peace. I didn't need to hold on to the past or the anger, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I was done. A few weeks later, I got a response from Elena. She'd written me back, and I knew it was her response because of the way it was worded, the tone that felt familiar even through a letter. "You don't own the story either." That was it. That was all she said. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. For once, I felt calm. There was nothing left to prove, no more games to play. She could spin her story however she wanted, but I didn't need to be a part of it anymore. I went back to my shop, back to the wood, the steady rhythm of my work, and the quiet joy of creating something real. I was no longer part of her world, and for the first time, I was free. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about winning. It was about the peace I found when I finally decided to let go. The battle, the chaos, none of it was mine anymore. I had my life back, and that was enough.